This will be the demo recording for creating a mock-up with smart objects, and today we'll use the food truck as an example. All right, so make sure that you have your food truck starter image loaded. You can select, there's multiple backgrounds in this file. You can select any of them. I'm going to use this one, and just for simplicity's sake, I want to delete the other layers, so I just have my first layer. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to trace around the food truck. So I'm going to go over to my pen tool, and I'm going to select that, or you can hit P on your keyboard, and I want to drag a marquee, or I'm going to create an outline, and then I'm going to make that a marquee once I'm done with a selection. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is click and drag and create my anchor points, and we'll clean this up later, and I'll show y'all how to do that later. So it doesn't have to be perfect with the pen tool, and the pen tool in Photoshop works similarly to Illustrator, but again, the name of the game with the pen tool is that you don't actually want to create too many points, because then that's going to get a little crazy. So what you want to do is just create points wherever you feel like you need them, just a little dabadooya when it comes to points. And again, this is not going to be perfect. I'll show you how to clean that up. But you want to connect all of your pen dots, and then once you have done that, we're going to create our selection. Okay, so we're going to go up to the top of the page, the top of the screen here, where it says make, and under make you're going to say selection, and you're just going to say okay to that dialog box that pops up. Also, I'm using dual screens, so if you don't see a dialog box, I will tell you what the dialog box is saying if there's anything that you need to select. Okay, so we now should have, as long as we connected all of our pin dots and we use the make selection at the top of the screen, we now have our blinking marquee, or some may call it the dancing ants. But again, my selection is not perfect, but I will show you how to go back in and edit that in the mask once we get to that point. Okay, so with your selection still active in your food truck layer, we're going to do an adjustment layer, and we're going to select solid fill. Okay, so here in your layers panel, go over to the little half and half, kind of looks like a black and white cookie situation icon. You're going to go over and click adjustment layer. Just kidding, that's the adjustment layer filter. So go back here, select your layer. In the bottom of your layers panel there, you're going to select that, and then you're going to say solid color. And then with this can be any color. What we're doing is we're essentially going to be, this is going to be the mask of the truck, and this is going to be, we'll eventually create this as the base color of our truck. So for now, do whatever color you want it to be. I'm going to go with this fun, weird pink color, okay? And so now what we have is, you'll notice, because we have the adjustment, we'll turn that layer off. You now see we have the mask there. So if we want to clean up this mask, and that's the first thing that we should do, if we want to clean up this mask, this is where we do so. So I'm actually going to turn down my opacity a little bit, and I will need to punch things out of this. So first of all, just to work a little quicker, I'm going to take my marquee, and if I say, and of course I can't delete that, but if I take my marquee and I drag in there, if you go grab your eraser tool, and weird, fill for this layer must be rasterized, weird, okay, sorry, Photoshop is yelling at me, y'all. All right, so I'm gonna drag my marquee, and I don't want a particular selection. Okay, so now I'm gonna go into my mask layer with that selection on. And so if you brush black, it'll fill. If you do white, it will have the opposite effect. So let's get our brush tool, not our eraser tool. We're gonna get our brush tool and make sure that the swatch is default to black. And then if you color in there, you'll notice I'm going to get a larger. So we're not actually erasing anything. If you'll notice in your layers panel, that is opening up this area in my clipping mask that is on this adjustment layer. And so this is actually allowing me to bring back visible area. So black will reveal, white will conceal. That's actually a little rhyme that a former student taught me, but it works really well. And then I'm going to do the same thing again with the windows. And I'm using the marquee because if you paint within the marquee, it's not going to let you go beyond those boundaries. Now, that's not to say that you may need to go in and just very carefully, because see there, I'm going to have to paint back the white around my window gasket there. Or if you feel like you have a steady enough hand, you can just paint within those areas. And for time's sake, I'm not going to do a full retouching on this, but I do want to give you all the gist of how to go about cleaning up that mask, okay? And then if we toggle to white, so if we want to add more in our mask there, if I want to get the areas of my truck that I missed, I can go in and paint. And if you, ideally you want to do this part with a hard brush rather than a soft brush. So I'd go in and tweak my brush settings, but you can actually paint back in areas that you missed in your mask. And at any point, the good thing about a mask is as long as you have this, at any point you can go in and take away and add to your mask. Okay, so I'm actually going to go ahead and turn that back up just so I can kind of clearly see my masking layers. And at this point, you also might use this to go back in and touch it up. But again, for time's sake, we're just going to pretend that this is flawless. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to begin to create shadows for my truck. So I want to duplicate the food truck layer. So you can right click and say duplicate layer, and then just say okay when the dialog box pops up. And then from there, I'm actually going to drag this to the top of my layers panel, and I'm going to call this the shadows. So I'm going to double click and rename that and call that the shadows layer. And then I'm going to go here with my adjustment layer. I'm going to hit Alt or Option, and I'm going to click and drag that mask into that layer as well. So this is actually masking. It doesn't look like it at the moment, but this actually has the same mask, and it's revealing and hiding the same parts from the mask that we created earlier. So I'm going to go over that again. You click in the mask layer. You don't want to double click. Just hover over the mask layer and then hit Option or Alt drag, and that will copy that to the layer above. Okay, and now I'm actually going to go in my layers panel while I'm in my shadows layer. I'm going to turn this to a linear burn, and then I'm going to say linear blend mode. Let's see, we can do actually linear burn. Let's do linear burn. There's a couple linear options, and then I'm going to turn that opacity of that down to 60 or 70%. And you'll notice now, so if we go back, if I hide that layer, so, and I start back, I started with my base layer, I added my color fill, and then from here, that actually blends with the color under it and gives me, you'll notice now, I have lights and shadows. So you can use any of your blend modes to give you that option. You can sort through those. Maybe you like the lighting of those better than others. But when you're doing something like this, you want to make sure that you have the light and shadows because that makes your image more believable and more realistic. So you can tweak this if you bump up the shadows, and if you bump it up too much, it starts to get a little wonky. So usually around 60 to 70% based on the color you're using, based on the look you want, gives it that look, okay? And now I do want to go back to my color fill layer and show you that if we want to change the color, we can do so at any time. So if you're messing with your truck and you decide, you know, hey, I want to make that pink just a little lighter, okay, boom, we've done that. So if you've ever downloaded a mock-up and it had options to change and alternate the color of the item, that's how they're doing this. So we've established our layers, and then the last thing that we have to do that will give us that mock-up magic is we want to convert to a smart object, okay? So I want you to now add a new layer. You're gonna add a completely new layer in your layers panel, okay? This is our last big phase of steps. And in this layer, you're gonna go to your rectangle tool, or you can hit U on your keyboard, and then you're gonna click and drag. You're gonna click and drag a rectangle to cover the entirety of your truck. Doesn't really matter what color this rectangle is at this point, because this is eventually just gonna become a placeholder, okay? And now we're gonna go through and we are gonna option drag and copy that layer mask again. And you'll see where that's coming through. And you should now have a shape that is filled, and it's also the shape and mask, it cropped to the shape of your truck, which is what we wanted. So from here, this layer is actually going to become our smart object layer. So I'm going to say control or right click in that layer, and I'm going to say convert to smart object, okay? And this doesn't look like anything super crazy yet. But I now want you to go and double click within that smart object. Ta-da! We have our truck and we have our smart object. So in a mock-up, because I know several of you've worked with mock-ups, any mock-up that you've worked with where it says place artwork here, this is that layer. It's a smart object. A smart object is a non-destructive way to work, and as long as you're putting items in a smart object, you can go back in, you can edit that, as long as you're using your adjustment layers, your clipping mask, your layer mask, your smart objects. Photoshop gives you what is called a non-destructive way of working, which is why the files are so huge, because you can actually go in and edit, and if you never really screw up a file as long as you're working in this manner, because you can always go back and edit it, and you can always go back and tweak it. So now I'm going to go to, and this is going to be off screen. You're not going to see this part because I'm only recording one side of my screen, but I'm going to go to my Illustrator document that I provided, and that pattern that I gave you, I'm actually going to click and drag that and make I'm going to make a rectangle of the pattern in Illustrator. So again, this is happening off screen, but this will make sense to you. And then I'm going to make a big rectangle pattern, and I'm going to copy, and then I'm going to come and paste that into Photoshop. I'm going to come over and let's see if that worked. All right, paste that into Photoshop, and you're going to have an option, and you can say paste as pixels, paste as path, paste as shape layer. I'm just going to say shape layer. Okay, and that did not give me what I thought it was going to give me. Sorry guys, I think it copied the same thing that I did from Photoshop. All right, let's try that again. I'm going to go into Illustrator. I'm going to copy that pattern again, and now just say copy as pixels. Let's do that. There we go. There's my fun little pattern. And so again, we pulled this from Illustrator. And because we have the mask, and we're using the mask here, we'll eventually hide that mask because we don't really need that anymore. But we copy that mask over to the smart object because that gives you your foundation. You can see where that's going to be applied. So now I'm going to hide that. I'm going to go back to my smart object, and I'm going to say close out, and it'll say save changes. And yes, you want to save the changes. Boom. Okay, that's a little wonky. Why didn't it crop to my layers there? It's because when we did that smart object, it actually took away our mask, but that's an easy fix as long as we option drag. Ta-da! So don't panic. Make sure that you have your mask layer, because if something is not cropping or rendering accordingly, double check that you have your mask layer in there. So I'm now going to go back. I'm going to double click back into my smart object. I'm actually going to take, now if you want to change opacity, you need to do that in your smart object layer. I'm going to turn the opacity of my pattern down just a little bit. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and get one of those fun little stock logos. Thank you, Vecteezy. One of those fun little stock logos just for demo purposes. And I'm going to paste that back into my food truck layer here. And just figure out where it makes sense for a logo to be on your truck. Think about how you're working with those graphics. And I'm going to scale that up here. I'm going to say, hey, yeah, that looks good. I'm going to hide my mask there. I'm going to go back in and I'm going to save my work. Ta-da! So now I have my graphics. And then if I go back, I'm going to hide all my layers again to show you. We started with this. We did our solid fill layer. We then copied and made our shadow layer. We copied over our mask as well. And then lastly, we have our smart object. So if I want to change, maybe I decide, hey, I don't super love that. Maybe it might look a little better as like a lilac pinky color. And maybe that plays well. So, and if you want to go in and you tweak, if you go to your blend mode and go to multiply in your smart object, that will also make that look like that is actually on the truck rather than it's just kind of sitting on top of the truck, because you'll notice it removed that white space from the logo and it actually is taking in the colors. Now, when you are using the blend modes, I do encourage you to click around and play with those, but do know that they blend in the layers, and if you have a blend mode turned on, it's blending with whatever is under it. And they're blending with each other, and it's blending that light, right? It's blending that RGB color space. It's blending that light that is on and in the monitor. So do keep that in mind. But that is, again, we would want to go in and kind of retouch our mask a little bit really before this became our final truck. But this is just a super quick and dirty, quick start guide to creating your food truck mock-up. Okay, and those are the steps. I'll also have written instructions available to you as well.